Thanks, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. Our presentation is called Fast 5. So quick tips to make your course more accessible. So like Tom said, I'm Lindsay, presenting with Lindsay, and we are presenting on our experience when we worked together at Tarrant County College. So how did we put together the Fast 5? How did we come up with the need for the Fast 5 in the first place, and what to do in the next steps? So to sum that up, today we're going to talk about how Tarrant County College's Connect campus has created an accessibility plan that continues to encourage faculty to be more aware of accessibility considerations in their course design process. We're going to start with the purpose of the Fast 5. We're going to get into all the details of the Fast 5, what they are. And then, like I said, how are we going to move forward, the next steps after the Fast 5? So when our work started, there wasn't an accessibility plan in place, and we were challenged to go back through existing courses and evaluate accessibility while modifying content at the same time. This ultimately is what started the discussion on how do we, one, get faculty to buy into this process, and two, ask ourselves, what are the items we feel that faculty will most likely be able to quickly incorporate into their courses, and really just any content that they're creating. So on the slide now, you'll see two quotes, and these are great leading into any conversation about accessibility. The first is, the time for action is now. It's never too late to do something. And then the second quote is, you can't make up for lost time. You can only do better in the future. So now that we're starting this conversation for accessibility, it's time to take action and make accessible content moving forward. There's another quote that I don't have listed on the slide that I like to refer to, and it's, do the best that you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better, by Maya Angelou. And I heard this in probably one of the first accessibility webinars that I ever attended. And it's something that has stuck with me the entire time in doing this work. And I hope that it sticks with you as well. So in addition to those quotes, on this slide, you'll see an image from Microsoft's Journey to Accessible Apps. And this image lists out situational disabilities, temporary disabilities, and permanent disabilities in relationship to touch, sight, hearing, and speech. It's important to remember that when we're designing with accessibility in mind, we're helping address all of these situations, from permanent to situational. So as you're putting in the work to your course design, you're helping a wide variety of learners. So as we move forward today, we're going to make reference to the WCAG standards and how they apply to the Fast 5. Standards are labeled as either A, AA, or AAA. When you see an A, that means that this is a minimum standard, the minimum action that should be taken. We should be doing this. Recommended is just as it states, it's a recommended action. And then AAA is the highest standard, what we would strive to be at. Once you get this slide deck after the presentation, we do have the WCAG standards linked here so that you can access that after the presentation. We're currently referring to 2.1 and 2.2, or 2.2, I'm sorry, should be released in April. There are a few adjustments that have been made, but those apply mostly to mobile devices. So that kind of sums up getting to the Fast 5. And Lindsay is going to kick off our first in our Fast 5.
All right, so thanks so much for that. And we are going to reference each point and give you the WCAG success criterion that's specific, and that is from the 2.0 or 2.1 version. As Lindsay mentioned, the 2.2 version is scheduled to be released in April. So the first one we're going to talk about is links or hyperlinks. And the WCAG success criterion that's referenced here is 2.4.4, link, purpose, and context. And as Lindsay mentioned, those are level A, AA, or AAA, and we've noted what the level is on the slide. So this is a level A, which means that it is a minimum expectation. It should be done by everyone in any digital resource. And the purpose of each link can be determined from the link text alone or from the link text together with its programmatically determined link context, except where the purpose of the link would be ambiguous to users in general. So that's kind of long verbiage, and we kind of break it down for you as to what this means. The destination of the link should be clear without reference to the surrounding text. We're going to give you some examples, but ideally what you want is for the link to point the end user and let them know where it is that they're going, rather than just providing them a URL or using phrases like click here or click this button or click to learn more. So here are some examples of what links should look like. And we've used the this, not that format. So for example, the first link, the first example has the WCAG2 overview, and below it, it says not this, and it has the URL. Now a screen reader will actually read all of the letters and all of the characters in a URL. So I personally would much prefer to hear WCAG2 overview instead of HTTPS://. I'm not going to read that whole thing because we'd all just really want to turn off our headphones, but we want to make sure that we embed that. So think about where you're pointing that end user and embed that URL into plain language. There's a question, can the link be within a line within a paragraph? Yes, it can. It absolutely can. If it's natural within the flow of a paragraph, you should do that. So again, instead of click here to learn how to meet WCAG guidelines, you can just highlight how to meet WCAG quick reference and insert the URL there. So because if you think about it, if you closed your eyes and asked someone to point to here, I might point to the right and Lindsay might point to the left, and we're both pointing to where we think here is. There's no visual perspective for here or there. So make sure that you're guiding those end users. Yes, adding an action verb to all links is and you can have a recording of a web link, have a screen reader record it, reading the link, and play it for an instructor, and it will very much reveal things. Those are all great points from the participants.
All right, so I'm going to jump into our second of our Fast Five. And I just want to point out, we did talk about how in that first slide talking about WCAG, that it was linked. These standards are also linked. So if you want to go right to the source, once you get this presentation, you are able to do so. So when talking about color, we're going to refer to Success Criterion 1.4.3, which is the contrast minimum. It is a level AA standard, so it is recommended. And it states that the visual presentation of text and images of text have a contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1, except for the following: large text, incidental, or logo types. You'll notice on this specific item, I've also referenced Criterion 1.4.6, which is contrast enhanced. So this is going to actually be a AAA standard. So this is a situation where we've got that next level. Basically, what this enhanced standard says is that the contrast is 7 to 1 instead of the 4.5 to 1. So what does all of this mean? Basically, the text and background colors must have enough contrast to ensure that the text is clear for all users. So someone with a vision impairment, someone with color blindness, we want to make sure that the text is accessible to them no matter what. And increasing the contrast is how we accomplish that. So we're going to look at a couple of things here. On the left-hand side, I've listed some examples so that you can kind of see just in general what good and bad examples look like. So my first says use a dark font color on a light background, and I've got black text on a white background. And just underneath that, I have use a light font color on a dark background. I've got white text over black background. Both of these have the same contrast because we're just looking at those same two colors, black and white. And it has sufficient contrast. No users should have difficulty looking at the text that's listed here. My next example is a green background with red text that says avoid the use of red and green. And I don't know about you, but when I look at this, it just hurts my eyes. It's not comfortable to try to read. But the contrast is not there. But we also have to address the fact that red and green color blindness is the most common form of color blindness. So this would not be readable to a large number of viewers. Next, we have avoid the use of monochromatic color schemes. So we've got a light blue background and a dark blue font. So while I can read this, it's not the easiest thing in the world, and it's not going to meet contrast minimums. So if you have someone who does have difficulty, they're not going to be able to differentiate that text from the background. And lastly, we have avoid using any color as the only indicator of importance. So in our example here, we have highlighted the word only, but in addition to that, I have bolded the text and italicized it. So a user who is unable to identify that yellow highlight is able to see that that text still does look different and the word only will stand out. I've also included a little X in the bottom of the page just to show that I used a graphic to indicate something. And, we typically use red for wrong and green for right. And there's nothing wrong with using those symbols. But you'll notice that I have outlined my X with black. So if I am unable to identify red on the screen, I can still see that black outline of the X indicating that something is wrong, or if it were a green check mark, that something is right or good. On the right-hand side of the screen, we have pulled actual examples that we have found in courses of the use of color. So the first is something that I've seen in a lot of syllabi. And it's red font to draw attention, and we've got yellow highlight. So we have color ×2 being used for importance, but not only that, it's red. The next two examples are course banners in a page, and we have redacted some information from those, but I will tell you that the text under those redacted areas are also that same color. So we have important dates, important course information that somebody might be unable to identify. And lastly, we have another example that uses 3 different ways to draw attention to text. I've got red text, which, like I said, we don't want to use. I've got black and yellow, and then I've got the green. I do want to point out that contrast is acceptable between black and yellow. You are able to use that. But here it's unclear what I really want to focus on. So we need to be consistent when we do determine a way that we want to draw attention. We want to be sure that we're consistent in how we do so.
And I just want to, we have some great chat conversation going on about, we have some designers who encourage using that AAA enhanced standard, which is amazing. There was a comment about avoiding italicized print, particularly with serif fonts. That's true. We have used a non-serif font in this presentation for clarity, and italicized print should probably be used sparingly. You should not just use it as your standard language, because it is difficult to read. A screen reader will not necessarily pick up that it's italicized, but it should be able to read it. But those are all great points.
Thanks, Lindsay.
All right, so I'm going to address headings, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about bulleted lists in this section as well, because it falls in the same kind of WCAG standard. So this is WCAG Success Criterion 2.4.6, headings and labels. This is a AA standard, which means it's recommended, and that headings and labels should describe the topic and the purpose. This is one of those really, really easy ones to pick up and do if you're looking for a very quick win, or what I call a micro change. And what does that mean? Well, headings are typically should be used to organize the content hierarchically. That means the information in every section should be labeled properly. And bulleted lists and unordered, or also known as unordered lists, or numbered lists known as ordered lists, also help with organization and should be used when when you're trying to organize information. So it sort of falls in the same category. We have some great conversations about fonts and color blindness and stuff going on. That's fantastic. All right, so Lindsay, go ahead. So on the left on this slide, we have an example of those headings. Now, I will point out that some learning management systems, we use Canvas, and I know Lindsay uses Canvas at Baylor as well. For purposes of pages, assignments, and discussion boards, that heading 1 is the title of the page. So when you're in something like a rich content editor in your learning management system, you may not see that heading 1 option, unlike something like Google Docs or Microsoft Word, where you would. But I like to use this graphic to kind of display to our faculty and staff how to use that heading hierarchy to help them. So the title is always going to be the heading 1. What's the most important thing? The heading 2 should be a subtitle. It's the next most important thing, or the topic that you're going to talk about. What would be the paragraph? Heading 3 would be the next subheading or next most important thing. And then, of course, you have your paragraphs. For some systems, like, for example, in Canvas, you get heading 2, 3, and 4. You can, in other documents, such as like Adobe, go through level 6. It just depends. And you, of course, can tag those in the back end in the HTML if you need to. But I just wanted to draw your attention to an actual example that we have recently from a document that I worked on over here on the right. The image on the top that is the white background image is what I received initially. And the image on the bottom is what happened after I applied lists and headings to the document. So you can see that at the in the image on the top, the title for that section is How to Transition from Paper to Digital. If you look at the image on the bottom, I've applied that heading 1 to that title, and you can see that it's made the font larger, it's made it more distinct, and it's easier to see. Additionally, in the image on the top, we have that hyperlink. We've already talked about hyperlinks. That's that open URL. So in the bottom, it's fixed to point it to that direct knowledge base. It tells the end user where it's directing to. And then we have in the image on the top, there's a list of items that are the processes that are going to be used. And if you notice in the bottom, that's a bulleted list because it appears to be a list. A screen reader will read a dash. It will say dash inventory your documents, dash think about retention. Whereas in the image on the bottom, those list items, the screen reader will announce to the person who's listening to the screen reader that a list appears, and it will tell them how many objects are in the list so that the end user knows how many things to be listening for, as well as when the list ends. So it's really, really useful. And you'll also notice how much cleaner and easier it is to read that image on the bottom. I have not gotten a you do it error when I have an H1 no text H2. So the other thing you need to know about headings, and I see some conversations going, when you have multiple headings, you need to follow in order. So you should not skip from H1 to H3. You should not start with H2 and go to H4. You need to follow in order and use that outline format. Some automated tools will pick those things up. Others will not, which is why the machine AI is not as good as a human. So you can run those accessibility checks, but you really do need to double check it. And most of them in tools like Google and Microsoft, you can use those heading tags, and then you can actually set the styles to the font size and the colors that you prefer. So you can do branded organizational specialty items.
And that's a good point, Lindsay. I know that the accessibility checkers don't always catch some things. I want to say that the Canvas built-in accessibility checker, if you skip heading 2 and go right to 3, it's not going to warn you. But if I go to heading level 2 and then I jump to heading level 4, then I'll get an error. So it's always good to have a visual manual check on those things as well. Okay, so now we're going to dive into alt text. And I just want to preface this with saying that alt text can be a webinar all on its own. So Lindsay and I are just going to introduce you to the basics of alt text, knowing that this is a much bigger topic than we can cover in our Fast 5. So we're going to start out with the criterion. This is 1.1.1 non-text content. This is a level A, so we should all be doing this. It says all non-text content that is presented to the user has a text alternative that serves the equivalent purpose, except for the situations listed below: controls input, time-based media, test, sensory, CAPTCHA, decoration, formatting, and visible. So what does this mean? Equivalent information is provided to a user when the original information is not text-based. So if you didn't type it into a Word document or on a Canvas page in the rich content editor, or you didn't type it directly into a presentation, it's most likely going to need some form of alternative text. So looking at the generalities for alternative text, they're descriptions of images that are read by screen readers. They should be very brief, approximately 120 characters or less, so very short and to the point. This is because some screen readers will actually cut them off at a certain point in time. So if you write something longer than that, it may be cut off and they wouldn't get the entire meaning of the image. We are able to create long descriptions for charts and graphs. Like I said, this right here is a webinar all in of itself. So like I said, we're talking simple images right now. And then we also have the classification of decorative images, which I'll get into on the next slide. But Lindsay is now going to explain this alt text decision tree.
So this decision tree actually came about to help explain to our faculty and staff how to decide whether to mark an image as decorative or whether we actually needed to add that alternative text or not. And it includes two questions. The first question you have to ask is, did you include an image? If the answer is no, then obviously you don't need to include alt text. If the answer is yes, then you move to the second question, which is to ask what the purpose of the image is on the document, in the post, on the page, in the assignment. Why are you using this image? If the purpose of the image is to include information, if it is a chart, a graph, a map, a flow chart, then you need to include alt text. And those images that I just described would probably have to require a longer, more descriptive text image. If it's to provide educational content, if it is a diagram or an illustration or something like a sketch note, you would also need to include alt text. That could be a photograph of a flower. So again, if it's information or education, you need to include alt text. If you are including it simply to visually break up the page or the information, or it's there as decoration, if it's there for cute factor, you do not have to put in alt text. You can mark it as decorative, and Lindsay's going to talk a little bit more about that.
There we go. Sorry about that. I've got an example here. Talking about the context of the image. So when we talk about, is it decorative? Is it not? The purpose of the image matters. The context matters. And as a designer, I personally can't always determine what that meaning is. So occasionally this job is a partnership with the SME to determine what exactly needs to go in that alt text section, or in the long description if it needs that. So I've got three situations here. The first is an image in a digital pamphlet describing flowers that you might come across in a hike. The second situation would be an image encountered in an ebook on botany. And then finally, an image to fill space on a welcome page. So three very different situations where the appropriate alt text would vary very drastically. So my alt text I've now listed below the situations. So in my digital pamphlet, I might be able to write something along the lines of a white flower with a single wrapped petal, a green stem, and a yellow center. It's a description of the flower that I might come across in the hike. If I am looking at an ebook on specific types of flowers, it might say something along the lines of a single xanthoteschia with a green stem, a white spade, and a yellow spadix. Very, very specific. Like I said, it might even need to go into more detail than that. But finally, I just like the white flower and I want it on my course welcome page. So I'm going to put that there next to my welcome to class. I can mark that as decorative. If you have access to a tool like, the Canvas Rich Content Editor, where you click on the image and you click decorative, it's going to take care of the HTML editing that's required to make that happen. If you are actually writing HTML, decorative images are usually indicated by a blank space between the quotation marks next to the alt tag. It's very important that when you upload an image, you do something and not nothing, because when I just say, oh, it's decorative, I'm just going to leave it alone, the alt text will tend to default to the image name. So if this was saved to my desktop as image 1, 2, 3, 4, the screen reader is just going to identify this as image 1, 2, 3, 4. So as a screen reader user, I wouldn't know that it was decorative. I would assume it had a purpose, but that the person, the designer, the instructor, whoever, just didn't put the alt text in. And Lindsay had a great example as we were talking through this. Anyone who has like sync in their car or their phone connected to their car, if you're ever driving and it reads a text message out loud to you and it just says image, and you're like going, I don't know what that means. That's the same experience that a screen reader user goes through when we either don't use the alt text or fail to mark it as decorative when it's decorative.
And there's some additional chat going on, Lindsay, about instructors maybe adding cartoons or comics related to content, just to add information to a course. And do you need to add alt text? And I would say, consider the purpose of it. The general thought in the chat is that, yes, you should add alt text because you're adding to the experience, you're adding information, you're adding education, you're shining a light on a discussion, you're illustrating a point, and someone would miss out on that. And yes, for the individual who said that describing comics or cartoons can be very, very challenging, yes, it can be very, very challenging. Same for Giphies or GIFs or GIFs, depending on how you want to pronounce that. Yes, if you're adding that, you're adding an experience, and a non-visual person wants that same experience and those same experiences. So think about those things. I would say default, it never hurts to add alt text.
And so we've actually added one more example here for alt text. And in all honesty, this is more of a long description example, but we wanted to show you just the things that have to be included, especially when we start getting into images that have text on them. So like I said, this would have a long description. There's a lot of content here that would well exceed 120 characters. But anything that's provided within that image must be provided to the user. So in the case of this blood drive flyer, they would need to know the location. They would need to know the time, the contact information, the fact that there's a giveaway, and what the ID requirements are. So anything stated on the image or anything that a sighted user would take away from the image still needs to be provided to a screen reader user.
Okay, and there was a question, what if you don't have access to the HTML to add a long description? There are lots of ways to do that. One of the ways we solve that in our Canvas courses and in the PDCs Lindsay and I worked on together, and now that I work on separately, is that we actually created a page, a separate page that links, and it says long description, hyperlinked within the course that goes to a page that offers that long description with a return link back to the original page that has the image. So let's talk about tables, the bane of my existence, and sometimes the most common, one of the most common errors that we find in particularly syllabi is where we see a lot of tables because people use them to create assignment tables or they create schedules and calendars, and this can be problematic. So WCAG success criterion from 2.1, so this was not originally in 2.0. 131 talks about information and relationships. This is a level A, so this is a minimum requirement that information, structure, and relationships be conveyed through presentation can be programmatically determined or available in text. That programmatically determined that we keep seeing is the HTML coding, by the way. What does this mean? That tables must serve a clear purpose and the flow of information must be predictable and easy to follow. And we're going to talk a little bit about tables and equations absolutely can be a nightmare. They can be lots of fun to remediate if you have to go back and fix them. So tables should have a table caption, or also known as a table title. They should have a title. They should have a header row, a header column, or a header row and column, something that identifies and lets the screen reader know that where to start. And they should be used to organize data, including those complex diagrams. One of the easiest ways to write alt text for complex diagrams, charts, graphs is actually to provide the data table that you use to create the chart or graph with. Tables should not be used for formatting. So if you're using tables to organize information on a page and make your graphics look clean, or your LMS homepage, course page look clean, there are ways to do that with HTML that are better and that are more appropriate for screen readers. You should not split or merge cells. Screen readers really struggle with that. And you should not have blank cells. Put in NA, not applicable, repeat information. If you're using a table, Lindsay and I had a discussion not too long ago about a table that was created by an instructor, and the instructor wanted students to complete the table. You might put in student response 1, student response 2, student response 3. Oh my gosh, PDFs. I just saw the chat pop up, PDFs. That's a whole different discussion, PDFs. But make sure that if you're going to put in have students respond, number those responses so that a student listening to a screen reader doesn't think that student response is going to be duplicated in every single cell. So the next slide is going to show some examples. On the left is an example of a table that would be accessible versus the table on the right that has those merged cells that's not accessible. Now, it did cut off the, when I took the screenshot, I did cut off the caption, shame on me. But these are actually examples of office hours tables. And you'll notice that one of the differences between the table on the left and the table on the right is when you get to Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and you have start time and end time, instead of merging those cells to say schedule with instructor, each cell says schedule with instructor to let the student know that this is a time that you would schedule it, and the screen reader will read that information. We could do a lot of whole classes on various and sundry. What about using bullet points in tables? Yes, if you put bullet points in a cell in a table, it will identify that there is a list and read the list within the cell. So if you want to list the 3 assignments that are due on Wednesday in the cell, you could do that. That is acceptable, but make sure you're using that bulleted list. Don't use dashes or asterisks. Use the bulleted or ordered list tool.
Okay, so going into this slide, so we covered all 5. I did want to address a comment that kind of popped up at the end of when I was talking last time. And it said, keep in mind that screen readers are used by people with normal vision, people with learning disabilities, and individuals with other cognitive disabilities and impairments. And that is absolutely true. And that is what is so important about accessibility concepts and tying it into UDL, Universal Design for Learning. The things that we're doing here help a wide variety of learners, not just one specific type of learner. So yes, thank you for adding that comment. And like I said, it ties in perfectly to this, because when we talk about what do students need, what do my students need from me in a class, how do you determine that? And the answer is you ask them. So nothing about them without them. The students are going to be able to tell you what kind of accommodations and what kind of adjustments help them the most. So just think about that as you're moving forward. Okay, so we wanted to talk about how we've kind of progressed through this process, kind of where we started, how we ended up at the Fast 5, and then the direction to go from there. So in the summer of 2021, we started sharing accessibility information with faculty and staff. And what kind of started this conversation was that Tarrant County College was transitioning from one LMS into Canvas. And in that process, there's a set of standardized courses that existed in the first LMS, and we needed to move over. And it was decided that we would do accessibility revisions on these courses at that time. So started the discussion, started seeing the common errors that were being made. And then, of course, we're still building courses at that time. So throughout this conversation, we're incorporating all of this into the new course builds. That developed to the Fast Five that we rolled out to the faculty and staff right away. As soon as we identified the common things that we were seeing, the easy changes that we could encourage faculty to make, we rolled that out.
So then we rolled into the spring of 2022. And Lindsay and I started working together on developing an accessibility roadmap because we realized that we were, as an institution at TCC, because at the time we were both working together at TCC, we were needing to make strides toward being compliant, not only with federal regulations and with WCAG standards, but also with potentially things that might come up with our accrediting agency. So we started working on an accessibility roadmap. We laid out where we thought we needed to be 3 years from now in 2025. And then we back planned and chunked into phases and sections of what we could do to reach those goals, like what our goals were as an institution. And if you're interested, you can reach out. I'd be happy to share the accessibility roadmap that we created, and that the end product that we're currently in, it's not been fully approved yet, but I'd be happy to share it with you and show you where we are and what we've looked at. And there are organizations that will help you with that as well. And then in the fall of 2022, as part of that accessibility roadmap, we created some courses. We have the intentional video course, which came about because we realized that when creating audio and video multimedia, our faculty and staff were really struggling with captions and transcription. And if they started with a script ahead of time and planned and thought about how they were going to present, that it would really help with that end piece. So we rolled that out. And then we had, we also developed a course called the Super 6 and the Super 7, which is part of that accessibility roadmap. And those are courses and expectations for our faculty. And I'm going to pull up the list right now. So the Super 6 is that micro certifications that our faculty would get, and that would be accessible Canvas pages that include headings, one on images, one on links, one on lists, one on tables. And we also included captioning, because actually that goes right into what the person's asking right now about using YouTube as a default. The automated captioning on YouTube is less than accurate quite often. And it does, even when it is accurate, it does not recognize common grammar and punctuation. So it tends to print in all lowercase as one stream of consciousness, which if you're watching a 20-minute video is one long run-on sentence, which for me as an educator is very bothersome. So we don't recommend using the AI of YouTube. You really do need to go in and check and edit your captions. Hence the Super 7, which was an additional micro-credential that we're going to ask our faculty to earn. And that would be a choice of accessible Canvas quizzes, accessible documents, accessible math and science. We actually broke that out as its own, or accessible audio and video multimedia transcripts, because captions and transcripts are two different things. The expectation at TCC moving from the fall of 2021 is that 100% of our multimedia will have accurate and correct captioning, which if you're pulling from a YouTube video that you don't own, you have to provide 100% accurate transcript. And then we built on an additional accessibility certification, which is a combination of those micro certifications, as well as an optional deep dive transcripts class called Transcription Express, that really gets deep into all the different types of transcripts and asks an instructor to really get certified in transcripts. As we moved into the spring, we completed our phase 1 rollout of the accessibility roadmap. I believe we're now into phase 3. Although we kind of are mid-phase, maybe 2.5, because we're waiting for the final roadmap to be approved. And we've also included an accessibility basics for Connect Staff, or our ABCs OneNote notebook. And because of our institutional settings, I can't share that with you, but I did recreate it as a Google Doc, which I would be happy to share the slide deck with you if you're interested, so that we can help provide some support to our staff on how to do those fast 5 things. It's things like email, presentations, documents, those sorts of things, flyers, what to look for and how to fix it. Was there a measure you collected in terms of before and after the adoption of accessibility at the institutional level? There was not. That's a great question. We were not necessarily measuring. I can tell you that we found accessibility issues in every course that we looked at. None of them were 100% accessible. So, and that was just from doing an overall check. That's a great question. So as far as next steps are concerned, this is kind of where we are. And there were a lot of questions that came in ahead of the presentation. Lindsay and I tried to look through them about how do we do this and what are the next steps and how do we implement this? So first of all, we would encourage you to recruit accessibility champions on your campus. You are going to have someone who comes to you because they have a student who has an accessibility or an accommodation letter and they need help right now, and you're going to help them. You're going to have someone who might have a family member or a dear close friend or someone that they're related to who, again, they have a need for accessibility, so it's important to them. Or maybe they themselves have a need. I work on a peer-developed course with a faculty member who is colorblind, and he specifically addressed that with the group. Then you go through the resources in this presentation. We have resources that we're going to highlight that are available to you. It is by no means an exhaustive list. And when you get the recording, check the chat and use those resources as well. Pick something that you know that you can change. And then take bigger steps. So first of all, start out by evaluating your campus and figure out where you are. There is no shame in acknowledging this is where we are and start from that point. Lindsay and I would sometimes at lunch actually take accessibility walks. We would take little Post-it notes and we'd walk around campus, and we were looking for a wide variety of things. Like we noted some signage had Braille on it and other signage didn't. Sometimes signs were really up high where people couldn't reach them. A wheelchair user might not be able to access it. So take an accessibility walk. Then take that list of those sticky notes, make a list of items, and go ahead and prioritize that list. Look at your institutional goals, look at your institutional metrics, and make a prioritized list. Then choose one thing as your focus and get really good at it. We've given you 5 that you can start with, but by no means is that an exhaustive list. And then when you get really good at that one thing, go to the next thing on the list or go to the next priority and work your way through it. Because if you have an accrediting agency or if you have a case that comes up, you can say, while we may not be fully compliant, we are working toward that.
Okay, so a big question in all of this that we always get is how do you motivate faculty to want to be a part of this process? And the answer really is to humanize accessibility. And I'm going to let Lindsay kind of elaborate on that. But we do have this slide in our presentation that you'll be able to access after the fact, where we provided examples in regards to mobility, hearing, vision, and situational disabilities to help you with that.
And I always like to say, ask, do you know someone who uses a cane? Do you know someone who uses a walker? Do you know someone who maybe needs hearing aids or watches their television with closed captions? Do you know someone who's colorblind? Do you know someone who wears glasses? Do you yourself wear glasses? Have you yourself ever broken a bone, and had an arm that was in a cast, or you've used crutches? In my case, I had surgery and I literally could not open the doors to get to our offices because they were too heavy. That's how you humanize this, because inevitably everyone knows someone who's gone through this. And as you age, this is going to become much more of a situation. You might need readers like I have on today. You might have to have a hearing aid. You might wear earbuds so that you can hear. So again, humanize it. And then we have these resources for you. Again, this is not by any means an exhaustive list, and there have been resources. I've seen them popping up in the chat. That's amazing. I did want to point out this very first link, the Ally Project. You'll notice it says A11 or 11Y. The hashtag Ally or A11Y is actually a hashtag that's used. It stands for accessibility because the 11 between the A and the Y represent the 11 letters that happen in between the A and the Y in the word accessibility. So when you see that hashtag A11Y, some people think that it means ally. It actually stands for accessibility. So we have some general accessibility resources, including the Ally Project, 3Play Media, the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, Nobility, the Worldwide Consortium, the WCAG cheat sheet is available there. WebAIM is a great one. There's an extension you can use for both Chrome and Edge called Wave. That's fantastic. That does some basic things. And then on the next slide, we have some more resources for you. We have some color checking resources for those color contrast. I know there were some mentioned in the chat. We've included one called Color Oracle to help you check for color blindness. There's a color checker for images and photos that'll check the contrast on your images and photos. We've included 3 screen readers, JAWS, which stands for Job Access with Speech, and NVIDIA, which is the non-visual desktop access, and then Orca. Each of those has a free version. I know that JAWS and NVIDIA have paid for license versions that actually do more. And there is a checklist that I created that if you click on the link when you get access to the deck, that will take you to a form that you fill out that'll let you do kind of a mini accessibility checklist. You can give it to faculty and it gives them a report that actually shows them the WCAG where they need to fix things. It's very simple. It's by no means a comprehensive list, but it is a good starting place.
And the last thing that we have to share with you today are accounts and hashtags to follow. So we have Accessibility Awareness, Accessibility Oz, the ADA National Network, the Ally Collective, DQ Systems, Great Lakes ADA, IAAP, 3Play Media, just hashtag Ally and hashtag accessibility. All of these resources will provide so much information, and in following online discussions, you pick up the questions that people are asking, you learn from them. And so it's just a great community that shares and asks and is happy to help you with accessibility questions that you have. I think we have just a few minutes left. I'm not sure how much time we have left for questions, but we're happy to answer any if you do have them.